Imagine this, a whole family wiped out. 5 lives snuffed out, buried in the very place they called home. And the prime suspect, the father who disappears without a trace. No goodbyes, no signs of remorse, just silence. This is the story of the Dupont de Ligonn's family murders, a case that shocked not only France but the entire world. It's a story that begs the question: how does a man go from being a loving father to an elusive fugitive? And what really happened behind the closed doors of that elegant home in Nantes? Today, we peel back the layers of this mystery, one that, even after more than a decade, remains unsolved. Let's start at the beginning. To understand the gravity of this case, we first need to know the people behind the tragedy, the Dupont de Ligonn's family. They weren't just any family, they belonged to a prestigious French lineage with deep aristocratic roots. Living in a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Nantes, they were respected in their community for their charm and social standing. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, the father, was a man of many layers, intelligent, charismatic, and deeply religious. He was married to Agnes, a woman equally devout in her faith, and together they had 4 children: Arthur, the eldest, followed by Thomas, Anne, and Benoit. From the outside, they appeared to be the perfect family, financially stable, well educated, and close knit. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind the calm facade of Sunday Mass and family vacations, there were cracks in Xavier's world that no one noticed until it was too late. His business ventures had been failing for years, drowning him in debt, and there were whispers that his carefully constructed life was collapsing around him. As his financial ruin loomed, so did the darkness that would soon engulf his family. April 2011. The Dupont de Ligonn's home, usually filled with the routine buzz of family life, had gone disturbingly silent. Neighbors began to notice unsettling signs: shutters tightly closed, no movement inside, and a growing pile of mail left untouched. Days passed, but the eerie stillness remained. It was unusual in this quiet, upscale neighborhood of Nantes, and it raised enough concern for someone to contact the authorities. When the police arrived, what they found was nothing short of horrifying. The house itself gave no immediate clues. There were no signs of forced entry, no traces of struggle. But then they noticed something peculiar in the garden, just beneath the patio. It wasn't long before they unearthed the horrifying truth. The bodies of Agnes and her 4 children, Arthur, Thomas, Anne, and Benoit, had been buried in shallow graves. Each body was carefully wrapped in blankets, a haunting sense of ritual surrounding the crime scene. What made it even more unsettling were the religious icons found with them: crucifixes placed beside the corpses, almost as if the killer had staged their final resting place with twisted care. But the most chilling part: the victims hadn't died from a random act of violence. They were killed execution style, each shot with precision. It was cold, calculated. And then the question that haunted everyone: where was Xavier, the father? Was he among the dead? Or had he somehow slipped away from the scene of this unimaginable horror? Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès did not disappear in a frantic rush. Instead, his movements were calm and methodical, as though he had planned every step. On April 15, 2011, he was last seen walking out of a budget hotel in the small town of Roquebrune-sur-Argens in southern France. The surveillance footage from that day is haunting. He's seen casually strolling out of the hotel lobby, carrying a large bag which many speculate contained a rifle. This bag becomes a critical detail, as authorities believe that Xavier owned a weapon of similar description, a .22 caliber rifle he had recently inherited from his father. This rifle, incidentally, matched the type of weapon used in the murders of his wife and children. But this final recorded sighting of Xavier raised more questions than it answered. Where was he going? The calmness with which he moved suggests he wasn't in a panic, despite his family being discovered buried under their home just days earlier. From that moment, Xavier vanished into thin air. A massive manhunt ensued, with French authorities combing the countryside, searching every lead. They scoured mountain ranges, checked abandoned buildings, and monitored travel routes, but nothing concrete surfaced. Not a single trace of his whereabouts. It was as if he had slipped into the shadows, leaving behind only speculation. And this is where the mystery deepens. Had Xavier planned his disappearance meticulously, evading capture through a carefully crafted escape plan? Or did something more sinister happen after he left the hotel? Was he hiding in plain sight, or had he met his end in the wilderness? The disappearance of Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès became an obsession for both investigators and the public. His calm demeanor, his preparation, and his complete vanishing act left a gaping hole in the narrative. Was he fleeing justice for the murder of his family, or was there another, darker force at play? Before the bodies were discovered, something deeply unsettling emerged. Letters written by Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès were sent to close friends and relatives. The content of these letters only added to the growing sense of confusion and mystery surrounding the case. In these bizarre messages, Xavier claimed that he and his family had been relocated to the United States as part of a witness protection program. According to him, he had been involved in a secretive drug operation, which now placed their lives in grave danger. The claims themselves seemed far-fetched. Xavier, a man with aristocratic roots and no known connection to criminal activity, suddenly portraying himself as a key figure in a drug cartel, was both improbable and alarming. The letters detailed their supposed new life under government protection, where the family would be given new identities and friends were advised not to seek contact. He even mentioned that the family's pets had been sent to new homes, adding an unsettling layer of domesticity to the outlandish story. But it wasn't just the content that was concerning, it was the tone. The letters were disturbingly detached, almost devoid of any emotion. Xavier did not express fear for his family's safety, nor did he offer any reassurances to those who were left behind. Instead, the writing was cold, almost businesslike, as if he were providing a factual update on an ordinary life change. For those who received the letters, alarm bells rang immediately. The story simply didn't add up. The claim that the family was in the witness protection program due to drug involvement seemed absurd, and the lack of emotion from Xavier only fueled suspicions that something was terribly wrong. His friends and family couldn't shake the feeling that the letters were part of an elaborate cover-up. The timing was also suspicious. The letters arrived just before the police uncovered the bodies beneath the family's home. Were these letters sent as a diversion? Was Xavier attempting to throw off investigators and delay the discovery of the murders? Or had he truly lost touch with reality, convincing himself that this fabricated narrative was real? Either way, the letters played a crucial role in muddying the waters of the investigation. They left everyone who read them questioning whether Xavier was a cold-blooded killer crafting his alibi or a man spiraling into madness. As investigators began to unravel the complexities of Xavier Dupont de Ligonn's life, one glaring issue came into focus: his severe financial troubles. Once seen as a successful businessman, Xavier's reality was far different from the image he portrayed. His ventures had failed, and he was drowning in debt, with loans piling up and no viable source of income to dig him out. Beneath the veneer of an aristocratic family living in comfort, there was a man battling financial ruin. Xavier had tried his hand at various business endeavors, including a sales company and investment opportunities, but none of them panned out. Over the years, these failures accumulated, leaving him with mounting debt that he could no longer ignore. Investigators found that he had borrowed large sums of money from friends and family, often making promises that his fortunes would turn around soon, but those promises were never fulfilled. In fact, he was on the verge of bankruptcy. This financial collapse didn't just threaten Xavier's personal well-being, it also endangered the family's carefully curated image. The Dupont de Ligonn's name carried with it a sense of prestige and old-world nobility, but behind closed doors, their financial reality was crumbling. The weight of maintaining that facade likely became an overwhelming burden for Xavier. The pressure to appear successful in a society that valued status and wealth could have been crushing. Could this financial despair have driven Xavier to commit the unthinkable? Many theorize that the looming financial ruin, combined with the pressure of living up to the expectations of his family's aristocratic lineage, may have pushed him to a breaking point. To a man as proud and image conscious as Xavier, the thought of his family falling into disgrace might have been unbearable. In this theory, the murders of his wife and children were not an act of rage, but of desperation and attempt to save them from a future of financial shame. But why flee afterward? Did Xavier view the killings as a twisted form of mercy, a way to shield his family from the fallout of his failures? Or did he see their deaths as a way to absolve himself of responsibility, allowing him to escape the ruins of the life he had built? As with many elements of this case, the financial aspect offers critical insights into Xavier's state of mind, but it also leaves us with more questions than answers. Once the bodies of his family were discovered, the urgency to locate Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès intensified. French authorities launched a nationwide manhunt, knowing that the key suspect had vanished. The search for Xavier was methodical and relentless. Investigators scoured the French countryside, tracing his movements step by step, starting from his last known sighting on April 15, 2011, when he was seen calmly walking out of a hotel in southern France. Early on, there were promising leads. Xavier had been spotted in several towns, traveling across southern France. He stayed in budget hotels, and at least once he was caught on security cameras withdrawing money from an ATM. Each sighting painted a picture of a man on the run, yet unnervingly composed. He wasn't moving quickly, nor did he seem desperate. Every decision appeared calculated, as if he had planned this escape well in advance. The police followed these leads meticulously, tracking his route through the Provence-Alpes Côte d'Azur region. Helicopters were deployed, checkpoints were set up, and border crossings were closely monitored. They expected Xavier to either leave the country or hide out in a remote area. Yet, despite the massive resources poured into the search, Xavier managed to stay one step ahead. He had left no digital footprint beyond those early ATM withdrawals, and by mid-April, all signs of his presence vanished. As the days turned into weeks, the frustration grew. Tips and reported sightings poured in from all over France and even from neighboring countries, but none of them led to anything solid. One of the most compelling sightings came from the area near Roquebrune-sur-Argens, where Xavier's car was eventually found abandoned. Despite an intense search of the surrounding woods and caves, the police found no trace of him. This marked the beginning of a long series of cold leads. Over the years, multiple sightings of Xavier were reported across Europe and even further afield. From monks in a monastery to a man resembling Xavier spotted in Latin America, none of these sightings resulted in any definitive answers. The trail seemed to vanish as completely as he did. How was Xavier able to disappear so completely? Was it luck, careful planning, or something else? His aristocratic background and education may have given him the means to disappear, but what remains remarkable is the sheer absence of clues. No body has ever been found, no confirmed sighting after April 15th. It's as if he simply ceased to exist. Xavier Dupont de Ligonn's disappearance has inspired a whirlwind of theories, each one adding a new layer of intrigue to the case. The fact that no one has seen him since April 2011, despite the extensive manhunt and numerous reported sightings, only fuels the mystery. How does a man, especially one so well known and implicated in such a horrific crime, manage to vanish without a trace? Let's explore the most prominent theories, each reflecting a different possibility of what might have happened to him. One of the most widely believed theories is that Xavier fled France and is now living under a false identity, possibly in a foreign country. His disappearance was so well orchestrated that it seems plausible he had a carefully planned escape route. Xavier was an educated man, fluent in several languages, and had traveled extensively throughout his life. These traits could have made it easier for him to slip into another country, blend into a new culture, and avoid detection. It's even possible that he had financial resources stashed away to facilitate his escape. This theory suggests that Xavier had planned the murders and his subsequent flight for months, if not longer. He could be living somewhere remote, far from the public eye, having rebuilt a new life under a different name. But if he did flee, where did he go? Some theorists believe that Xavier might have connections to far-flung places like South America or Southeast Asia regions where he could disappear with relative ease. The reported sightings of him in places like Argentina and Brazil feed into this narrative. Yet for over a decade, no confirmed leads have emerged. Could he really have been so meticulous in his planning that he left no trace for authorities to follow? Another prevailing theory suggests a far darker fate, that Xavier took his own life shortly after fleeing. This idea rests on the belief that a man who murdered his entire family, especially someone as devoutly religious as Xavier, may have been overwhelmed by guilt or despair. The fact that he was last seen near a remote, rugged area in southern France supports the notion that he may have wandered into the wilderness to end his life. Some speculate that his body could be hidden in the dense forests or mountainous terrain, waiting to be discovered. The police did search those areas extensively, but the wild and vast landscape could easily conceal a body for years, if not indefinitely. There's also the possibility that Xavier had help in orchestrating his escape. Could he have had an accomplice, someone who provided him with the resources and connections needed to disappear? This theory isn't far-fetched when you consider Xavier's aristocratic background and the influence his family name carried. While there's no concrete evidence to support this, the fact that he vanished so effectively suggests that he may not have been working alone. Friends, distant relatives, or even underground networks could have assisted him in securing a new identity or smuggling him out of France. Still, some find it hard to believe that someone as high profile as Xavier could remain hidden for so long without a single confirmed sighting. Could it be that he's in hiding but constantly on the move, never staying in one place long enough to leave a trail? Or is he living in an isolated, off the grid location where he has no contact with the outside world? Theories even range as far as suggesting he's hiding in plain sight, possibly in a religious or monastic community where he could blend into the background undetected. And if Xavier is indeed alive, the most haunting question is, what must he be thinking after all these years? Does he feel remorse for the brutal killings of his wife and children? Or is he so far detached from reality that he views himself as a victim in this tragic narrative? His mental state before and after the murders remains a point of speculation. His detachment in the letters, the calculated manner of the killings, and the calm with which he disappeared all suggest a man who was not spiraling into madness, but methodically carrying out a plan. If that's true, then Xavier may not feel guilt at all. He could see himself as someone who acted out of necessity, whether to preserve his own twisted sense of pride or protect his family from what he perceived as an inevitable downfall. What makes this case so chilling is that all of these theories, no matter how contradictory they seem, remain plausible. Until Xavier is found dead or alive, his disappearance will continue to be a subject of endless speculation. And in the midst of all these theories, we're left with one undeniable truth. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, the man who was once a father and husband, is now a ghost. A ghost who may still be walking among us, or one whose remains lie undiscovered somewhere in the remote corners of France. In the years since Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès vanished, the mystery surrounding his disappearance has only deepened, largely due to the numerous reported sightings of him across the globe. It seems as though every time the case begins to fade from the public eye, another alleged sighting brings it back into the spotlight. These reports have come from as far as South America, but none have ever led to a definitive answer. One of the most striking incidents occurred in 2019 when authorities arrested a man at Glasgow Airport in Scotland. At first, the arrest was met with a wave of excitement and speculation had they finally found Xavier after nearly a decade on the run. The man in question bore a striking resemblance to him, and his movements seemed suspicious enough to warrant an arrest. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the case would be resolved, but DNA tests quickly dashed those hopes. The man was not Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès. He was simply a case of mistaken identity. Despite this, sightings continue to surface, each one reinvigorating the mystery. From Argentina to Southeast Asia, there have been whispers of a man resembling Xavier, leading many to believe that he's still out there, alive and well, successfully evading capture. But why do people remain convinced of this? What makes so many believe that a man who disappeared so thoroughly could still be alive after all this time? Part of the answer lies in the nature of Xavier's disappearance. Unlike many fugitives who go on the run, Xavier left behind almost no trace. There were no hasty escapes, no reckless spending or slip-ups, no calls or letters that could lead investigators to his location. His disappearance was so meticulously executed that it gives the impression of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. It's this air of careful planning that leads people to believe he must have had an escape plan in place, one so precise that he could disappear without a trace for years. There's also the allure of the mystery itself. People are naturally drawn to unresolved cases, especially ones as dramatic and high profile as this. Every new sighting, whether credible or not, feeds into the collective fascination with the case. It gives people a reason to believe that Xavier could still be alive, living a life somewhere far from the horror he left behind in France. It also raises the unsettling possibility that if he is alive, he could be hiding in plain sight, blending into his surroundings without arousing suspicion. Yet, with each sighting that fails to yield results, the question remains, why hasn't he been caught? If Xavier is alive and living under a new identity, what's preventing him from being discovered? Has he been able to remain undetected because he's hiding in a remote part of the world? Or is it possible that he's moving frequently, never staying in one place long enough to leave a trail? Some theorize that he could be living in isolation, in a place where no one knows his true identity, perhaps even in a religious community, where it's easy to blend in without raising questions. Others believe he might have undergone plastic surgery or altered his appearance significantly to avoid recognition. Whatever the case may be, the constant sightings and near misses keep the public and investigators on edge. Each new tip brings a wave of renewed hope, only to be met with disappointment when the truth comes to light. The Glasgow airport incident is perhaps the most prominent example of this. For a moment, the world held its breath, thinking that the long hunt for Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès was finally over. But in the end, it wasn't him. And this is the heart of the mystery. The possibility that, even after all this time, Xavier could be out there, living a life completely removed from the one he destroyed in Nantes. Each sighting only serves to remind us how elusive he remains, and until the day he's found, if that day ever comes, his disappearance will continue to haunt us all. More than a decade has passed since Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès and his family became the subjects of one of the most disturbing and confounding mysteries in modern French history. Yet, for all the investigations, theories, and speculations, we are left with more questions than answers. This case haunts not just those who knew the Dupont de Ligonnès family, but anyone who has followed the story, gripped by its dark and unresolved nature. At its core, we are left to wonder, was Xavier truly responsible for the calculated and brutal murders of his family, or is there more to the story than we can even begin to understand? One of the most persistent questions is whether Xavier acted alone, or if he was simply the scapegoat in a larger, more sinister plot. While the evidence seems to point toward Xavier as the orchestrator of this tragedy, his calm disappearance, the meticulous burial of his family, and the bizarre letters, it's not enough to completely close the case. Could there have been other forces at work? Was Xavier part of a darker, more complex network that assisted him in escaping and covering up the truth? Or was he simply a man who had reached the end of his tether, brought down by financial ruin and the crushing weight of societal expectations? Then there's the question of whether Xavier is still alive. Despite years of searching, the countless man hours devoted to tracking him down, and the international spotlight on the case, he remains elusive. How does a man with such a high profile, connected to such a horrendous crime, simply disappear without a trace? Is he living under a false identity somewhere far from France, or did he meet his end in the remote countryside shortly after the murders, his body lying undiscovered in some forgotten place? Each time the question of his fate comes up, we return to the chilling possibility that Xavier may still be alive, living a life completely removed from the chaos he left behind. If this is true, what must be going through his mind after all these years? Does he feel the weight of guilt and regret, or has he fully rationalized his actions, viewing the murders as some twisted form of escape for his family? Is he constantly looking over his shoulder, knowing that one day he might be discovered, or has he found a way to completely sever ties with his past? On the other hand, there is a growing sense that we may never find the answers. The possibility that Xavier met his own end, either by suicide or through more nefarious means, cannot be discounted. The fact that no concrete evidence of his whereabouts has ever been uncovered fuels the theory that he may have died shortly after fleeing. The vast, rugged terrain near his last known location is difficult to search thoroughly, and if he did take his own life, his remains could be hidden for decades, or perhaps forever. If that's the case, then the answers to what truly happened in the Dupont de Ligonns home may have died with him. Even the motivations behind the murders remain clouded. Was it simply the result of a man consumed by financial ruin, unable to face the shame of losing everything he had built? Or was there something deeper, a psychological break that caused Xavier to believe this was the only way out for his family? The fact that the bodies were buried with such care, wrapped in blankets and laid to rest with religious icons, suggests a mind that was, in some twisted way, at peace with what he had done. But why? In the end, this case may never be solved. The answers we seek may forever remain buried, much like the bodies of Xavier's family in the house in Nantes, along with whatever secrets Xavier took with him. The case of the Dupont de Ligonn's family murders is not just a tragedy of lost lives. It's a tragedy of unanswered questions. And as long as those questions linger, the case will continue to haunt France and the rest of the world for years to come. Sometimes in true crime, the most unsettling part is not what we know, but what we will never know.